It was a regular Tuesday morning in early spring, and Malik Johnson was running late for his job interview. The 17-year-old lived in the suburbs of a small American town, a place where the streets seemed to stretch endlessly beneath a sky that always felt a little too big for the modest houses and quiet corners. As he slid into his aging car, the engine sputtered and groaned, a constant reminder of the uncertainty that had come to define his life. He was used to this feeling. Used to scraping by with whatever he could get. Whether it was fixing a broken-down car or running errands for his mother. She had always taught him that hard work, kindness, and a little bit of hope would carry him through the toughest of times. But today, more than ever, he was hoping that luck would finally be on his side. Malik had always dreamed of becoming a doctor. The thought of helping people, of healing and making a difference, had been the one thing that kept him going through his struggles. But dreams were hard to chase when the weight of his family's financial difficulties constantly hung over him like a dark cloud. His father had long since abandoned them, leaving Malik to help support his mother, Karen, and his younger brother, Chris. His ambition to attend college felt like a distant fantasy, one that seemed further out of reach with each passing day. Today was supposed to be different. Though, today, he had an interview for a part-time job at a local supermarket. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the kind of opportunity that might lead to more, something that would allow him to contribute more to his family, to give his mother a break. But as he sped down the road, the ticking of the clock in his head louder than the hum of his car, he saw her, a woman, standing beside a car on the side of the road, her hand raised, signaling for help. She was pregnant, visibly distressed, and it was obvious that something was wrong. Without thinking, Malik slowed down, his heart racing not only from the urgency of his own plans but from the sudden urge to help this woman in need. Her name was Emily Scott. She looked to be in the late stages of her pregnancy, her face a mix of exhaustion and anxiety. The flat tire on her car seemed like such a trivial problem in comparison to what she must have been going through. But it was enough to stop her in her tracks. She was stranded, alone, and perhaps the burden of carrying a child had left her feeling helpless. "Are you all right?" Malik called out to her, rolling down the window of his car. She turned, her face lighting up with a sense of relief as she saw him pull over. I don't know what to do," she said, her voice shaky. "I think I'm going into labor. And my tire, it's flat. I need to get to the hospital." Malik's heart skipped a beat. He could see the panic in her eyes. She wasn't just stranded, she was in pain. And there was no one to help her. His interview was important. Yes. But here was a woman, a mother-to-be, in desperate need of assistance. There was no question in Malik's mind about what to do. He parked his car and approached her, his mind racing. He was no mechanic, but he knew enough to change a tire. And in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. He worked quickly, his hands stained with grease as he took the spare tire from the trunk and replaced the flat. As he worked, he spoke to her, trying to keep her calm. "It's going to be all right," he reassured her, though even he wasn't sure what was coming next. "We'll get you to the hospital." Just as he finished, Emily's face twisted in pain. She gasped, clutching her stomach. "It's happening now," she whispered, her voice strained. Without a moment's hesitation, Malik helped her into the passenger seat of his car, his heart pounding in his chest. She leaned back against the seat, trying to breathe through the contractions. But it was clear that time was running out. "Hold on," Malik said, more to himself than to her. He slammed the car into gear and sped off, heading straight for the nearest hospital. The road was blurry as he tried to focus on both driving and calming her down. He could feel his own fear building as her breathing grew heavier, and the silence between them seemed to fill the car with an overwhelming weight. But it was also a silence filled with empathy, with understanding that sometimes, the most important thing you can do in life is to show up for someone else. As he drove, He couldn't help but reflect on how much he had sacrificed in that moment. He had been late for his interview. Yes. And he had no idea what consequences awaited him. But in his heart, Malik knew that helping Emily was far more important than a job. It was something deeper than that, an act of kindness that transcended the immediate challenges he was facing. It was, in a way, a reminder that even in the toughest of times, there was still room for compassion, for empathy, for doing what was right. He pulled into the hospital just as Emily's contractions reached their peak. He rushed inside to get help, his voice frantic as he explained the situation. Nurses and doctors immediately came to her aid, and Malik stepped back, allowing them to take over. As he watched the doctors work, he felt a profound sense of relief. Emily was in good hands. But Malik didn't wait around for accolades or thanks. He had done what needed to be done. And that was enough. As he left the hospital, he couldn't help but smile. He had done the right thing, even if it had cost him a job opportunity. That, he realized, was a choice he would never regret. This was only the beginning, though. The act of kindness he had shown Emily would come to change not only his life but the lives of those around him in ways he could never have imagined. Malik's heart was still racing as he sped from the hospital parking lot. He hadn't realized how much adrenaline had surged through him during the frantic ride there and the anxious moments while waiting for the doctors to take over. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. But his mind was already on the next challenge, the job interview. As he drove toward the local supermarket, his thoughts swirled. The interview. The future. His family. Malik had worked hard to make sure he was prepared for this moment. Even if he hadn't been able to wear a clean shirt or make it there on time, he had dreamed of this opportunity, thinking that maybe, just maybe, it would be the beginning of something better, something more stable. The job at the supermarket wasn't glamorous. But it was a start. It was the chance to earn some money and relieve some of the pressure on his mother. By the time Malik reached the front of the store, the reality of the situation hit him. He had missed the interview window. His clothes were smeared with grease, his hair messy from rushing around, and the clock on his car dashboard told him he was already 20 minutes late. He sighed, running a hand over his face, and hoped that maybe they'd understand. He opened the door to the store and walked in, his footsteps echoing on the tile floor. A young receptionist smiled politely at him, but he could tell she had already seen the disappointment in his eyes. "You're here for the interview, right?" she asked. "Yeah. I'm Malik Johnson. I'm sorry I'm late." The receptionist nodded, not looking particularly surprised. "The manager is waiting for you in the back." As Malik walked through the store, his heart thudded louder. He passed aisles stacked with everyday items, cans of beans, bags of flour, stacks of toilet paper. It felt strange, seeing all of it now, knowing that his dream had seemed so close earlier, only to be interrupted by someone else's emergency. He reached the manager's office, and a middle-aged man with graying hair looked up from behind his desk. The man's eyes briefly scanned Malik, lingering on his messy clothes and the nervous tension in his posture. Without saying anything, the manager gestured for him to sit. "Mr. Johnson," the manager began, his voice steady but firm. "I won't lie to you. You're late. Punctuality is important in this business." Malik's stomach sank. He could feel the weight of the rejection settling in, heavy and undeniable. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out immediately. He tried to explain, tried to tell the manager what had happened, why he'd been delayed, but his throat felt tight. And the words seemed inadequate, like they wouldn't make a difference. "I understand," Malik finally said, his voice quieter than he'd intended. "I know it's not an excuse, but something important came up." The manager, looking unamused, sighed. "I appreciate you showing up, but you're already 20 minutes late. We need someone reliable, someone who can show up on time." Malik could feel the sting of the words. It wasn't the first time someone had written him off because of circumstances beyond his control. His life hadn't been easy, and he had learned to fight for the things he wanted. But this was different. It wasn't just the job he was losing. It was a symbol of his continued struggle to make a better life for himself and his family. I understand, Malik repeated, nodding slowly. Thank you for your time. He stood up, shaking the manager's hand, though it felt more like an obligatory gesture than one of mutual respect. As he left the office, the weight of the moment pressed down on him, making it harder to breathe. The store, with all its shelves and aisles of neatly stacked products, seemed to mock him now. He had come here with hope, but all he had to show for it was rejection. Outside, Malik leaned against his car, trying to gather himself. He couldn't afford to get discouraged. Not now. His family needed him. His mother, Karen, was depending on him. But there was a bitter taste in his mouth, one that lingered long after he had driven away from the store. Was this just another failure? Was this all life had in store for him? But then, as he turned onto the highway, he thought about the choice he had made earlier. Helping Emily, taking her to the hospital. It had cost him the job, yes. But in his heart, Malik knew he had done the right thing. Sometimes, the world didn't make sense. It didn't reward you for doing the right thing. But that didn't change the fact that he had acted out of compassion. And that, in itself, was something he could hold on to. The road ahead seemed long and uncertain. But Malik was determined to keep moving forward, no matter how many setbacks he faced. He knew deep down that his journey had just begun, and there would be other opportunities. He just had to keep believing in himself. Malik had left the supermarket parking lot, still feeling the sting of rejection. But his mind was preoccupied with something else, Emily. He kept replaying the moments in his mind. The image of her frightened face, the way she clutched her stomach, and the urgent need to get her to safety. He had made a choice. And no matter how it had turned out for him, he knew he had done the right thing. Still, the weight of the situation settled over him again as he turned his car back toward the hospital. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he should check on her, make sure she and the baby were okay. It wasn't long before Malik arrived at the hospital, pulling into the parking lot, his car coming to a stop in front of the emergency room entrance. The tension in his chest hadn't eased. He had been a stranger to Emily, just a guy with a flat tire helping someone in need. And yet now he felt connected to her, as if their lives had intertwined in a way he hadn't expected. It was strange. He barely knew her, but he cared about what happened to her and her baby. As he walked through the hospital doors, he paused, unsure of where to go. He didn't want to intrude on Emily's space. He didn't want to come across as overbearing or pushy. But his curiosity got the better of him. He asked a nurse at the desk if Emily had delivered. She just gave birth about 15 minutes ago, the nurse replied. Healthy baby boy. Ethan. She's recovering now. Malik's heart lightened at the news. A healthy baby boy. That was all that mattered. Despite the chaos of the day, there was a small moment of peace in hearing that Emily and her baby were okay. When Malik was finally allowed to visit, he was led into the room where Emily lay in a hospital bed, her husband John Scott sitting at her side. They both looked up when Malik entered, their faces filled with gratitude. Emily's face was pale from exhaustion, but there was a softness to her expression, a sense of relief, of joy. Even John, too, seemed relieved, and Malik could see the exhaustion in his eyes as well. Malik, Emily whispered, her voice raspy but full of emotion. Thank you. Thank you for everything. Malik stood awkwardly by the door, not quite knowing how to respond. He had expected to hear something like that, but it still felt strange. It wasn't that he hadn't done it for recognition, he hadn't, but to hear the words spoken aloud made the whole situation feel much more real. I didn't do much, Malik said, lowering his gaze. I just helped get you here. You did more than that. John spoke up. His voice gruff but sincere. "You saved our lives today." Malik shrugged, not knowing what to say. He wasn't comfortable with praise. He was just a kid trying to make his way through the world. Trying to help where he could. Even if it meant sacrificing his own future. Emily smiled weakly, her eyes starting to well with tears. "You never asked for anything. You didn't even stay for a thank you. You just helped. That's rare." She paused, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'll never forget it." It was then that Malik realized how much his small act of kindness had impacted her. He hadn't thought much of it in the moment, he'd simply seen a woman in need and acted without hesitation. But to her, it meant the world. To her, it was everything. As Emily talked, Malik realized something else as well. This was more than just a single moment, this was a turning point. His life, though imperfect, had taken a direction he had never expected. Here he was, standing in a hospital room, with a woman and a family whose lives he had touched. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to his story than the difficulties he faced. Perhaps this was his chance to make a real difference. "I didn't do it for thanks," Malik said, his voice quieter now. I wanted to make sure you were okay. That's all." John nodded, his eyes meeting Malik's. "We get that. But still, we owe you. We owe you big time." It was then that Malik understood. Helping people, even when it wasn't convenient, even when there was nothing in it for you, could change everything. His small decision had set something in motion. Something that went far beyond the simple act of helping a stranger on the side of the road. It had created a connection, a bond that neither of them could have predicted. As he said his goodbyes and stepped out of the room, Malik couldn't help but feel that, despite the hardships he was facing, his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine yet. He didn't know what was coming, but something in him felt certain that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. And for the first time in a long while, Malik allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path after all. Malik sat in his car, staring at the steering wheel, his fingers tracing the worn leather. He had just driven away from the hospital, the weight of the day hanging heavy on his shoulders. It was strange, he had helped someone. He had done something good. But the satisfaction he should have felt was tempered by an overwhelming sense of frustration. Life, for him, was not a series of kind deeds rewarded in return. It had always been a constant struggle. As a 17-year-old, Malik had dreams like any young person. He had aspirations, he wanted to go to college, become a doctor, and change his life. His mother, Karen Johnson, had worked tirelessly to provide for him and his younger brother, Chris. But the realities of their situation were suffocating. His father had abandoned them when Malik was young, leaving Karen to raise 2 children on her own. Life had never been easy. Every day was a reminder of the struggle they faced just to get by. The bills, the groceries, the rent, all of it weighed on Malik's mind constantly. It had been hard for him to admit it. But the truth was simple, he had always felt like he was failing his family. The idea of going to college was a dream that felt out of reach. The money wasn't there. His mother worked multiple jobs. And yet there were days when they barely scraped by. He had no idea how he could afford college, let alone pursue a career in medicine. And so, the dream seemed impossible, something that was better left forgotten. But even with those thoughts heavy in his mind, Malik knew he had to find a way to support his family. They needed him. That was why he had been so determined to land that job. It wasn't just for him, it was for his mother, Karen, who worked long hours and still struggled to keep food on the table. It was for Chris, his little brother, who deserved better than the life they were stuck in. He couldn't let them down. His sacrifice wasn't just about missing that job interview. It was about doing what he had to do to keep the family afloat. Malik hadn't planned to help Emily Scott. It wasn't like he had a list of heroic deeds he wanted to tick off. But when he had seen her stranded on the side of the road, He couldn't just drive by. The thought of someone, especially a pregnant woman, in distress, alone, was enough to make him stop. It was instinct. And yet, as much as it had been the right thing to do, Malik knew that helping Emily meant missing out on a chance to change his own life. The opportunity was gone. He shook his head, fighting the self-doubt creeping in. The job interview had been important. Yes. But what he had done for Emily had been important too. And somehow, he had to reconcile those two things. In the quiet of his car, with the hum of the engine in the background, Malik wondered what his future would look like. Would he ever get a chance to fulfill his own dreams? Would he ever be able to leave the weight of financial struggle behind him? But even in his doubts, Malik understood something deeper. The choices he made, the sacrifices he had already made, were rooted in a love for his family. They had always come first. And no matter how tough things were, no matter how far away his own dreams felt, he knew one thing for sure: he would never regret helping Emily. That was just who he was. Selflessness was part of him, even when life didn't give him much in return. As he drove home that night, his thoughts were consumed with everything that had happened. But in the midst of his worries, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Something beyond the struggles, beyond the sacrifices. It was like the universe had shifted. Just a little bit. He wasn't sure what it meant yet. But he knew that he wasn't alone in this fight anymore. There were people who saw him, who understood what he was doing. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like there might be a way forward. He wasn't sure how, but he hoped he could hold on long enough to find it. The days that followed were a blur for Emily and John Scott. Their minds were still wrapped in the shock and gratitude of that fateful afternoon. Emily had been certain that Malik was just another stranger, someone kind enough to help without expecting anything in return. But as she recovered from the labor and looked at her new son, Ethan, a thought kept lingering. She couldn't forget what he had done for her, how he had rushed her to the hospital without a second thought. Despite being late for something important in his own life, it wasn't enough to just be grateful from a distance. Emily felt she needed to find him, to thank him properly. She wasn't sure how, but she was determined. After all, people like Malik weren't supposed to go unnoticed. Not after what he had done. John, too, had been deeply moved. The whole situation was a reminder of how unpredictable and fleeting life could be. And yet, in that unpredictability, Malik had chosen to act with kindness and selflessness, something rare in a world often consumed by self-interest. As a successful business owner, John knew that people like Malik were often overlooked, either unnoticed or taken for granted. But John wasn't going to let that happen. He saw the potential in Malik, and he was determined to find him. The hunt began quietly, almost like a private mission between the two of them. They spent days retracing Emily's steps from that afternoon. They drove back to the place where she had been stranded, hoping to spot any sign of the young man who had come to her rescue. Emily stopped by the local convenience store to ask around, showing Malik's picture to anyone who might recognize him. It wasn't easy, most people hadn't seen him before, and the neighborhood wasn't exactly a place where people lingered for casual chats. But Emily was undeterred. The more she learned about Malik, the more she realized how little she knew about him. She didn't even know where he lived. All she knew was that he had acted in a moment of need. And now she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to do something for him in return. After several hours of searching, they found themselves on the edge of town, in a quieter, less developed neighborhood. It wasn't where people with money lived, but it had a different kind of charm. A mix of modest homes, small yards, and a sense of community that was rare in the hustle and bustle of urban life. Malik's house, they discovered, was tucked into one of these quiet streets. It wasn't much, but it told a story. When Emily and John knocked on the door, a middle-aged woman with a warm, tired smile greeted them. She was surprised to see strangers standing on her porch, but her eyes softened when Emily introduced herself. "We're looking for Malik," John said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "He helped my wife the other day, and we want to thank him." The woman, Malik's mother Karen, nodded slowly, understanding immediately. "He's inside," she said. "But, to be honest, I'm not sure he's in the mood for visitors." She hesitated, clearly conflicted. "He's been through a lot lately. Still, he's a good boy. A very good boy. Come in." Karen led them into the house, where they were met with the sight of a modest living room, the walls lined with pictures of Malik and his family. The space was small but filled with warmth, the kind of warmth that comes from love and care despite limited means. Malik, however, was not at ease. He sat on the couch, his eyes focused on something only he could see, lost in thought. When he looked up and saw the Scotts standing in the doorway, his eyes widened with surprise. Emily stepped forward first, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "Malik," she said, "I don't know if words can really express how thankful we are for what you did for me. You saved my life. And you saved Ethan's life. You didn't have to do that. I don't even know how to thank you properly, but I need you to know how much it means." Malik stood up, uncertain of what to say. He had never expected anything in return for what he had done. He was just helping, doing what anyone would do. But here they were, standing in front of him, offering something he hadn't expected: gratitude, recognition, and something even more profound, the chance for his future to change. In that moment, Malik felt a wave of emotions. He was grateful for their kindness, but also ashamed. He had so little to offer, and yet they were standing there, as if he had done something extraordinary. He wasn't sure how to accept it. But somehow, in the presence of Emily and John, he realized that perhaps this moment would change everything for him. It was the beginning of something he hadn't dared to dream of, an opportunity to finally move beyond the struggles that had defined his life for so long. The room was heavy with silence after Emily's words hung in the air. Malik shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react to the overwhelming gratitude that was pouring his way. His life had been a constant struggle, and kindness from others felt like something so foreign, so unreal. But here it was, he had done something good, something that mattered, and the weight of that realization began to settle deep within him. John Scott, standing just a little behind his wife, studied Malik carefully. He saw a young man standing before him, someone who clearly didn't expect any recognition or reward for his actions. But John could also see something else, a potential that had yet to be unlocked. A spark of ambition buried beneath layers of hardship. It wasn't just gratitude that had driven him to search for Malik, it was something deeper. He felt an undeniable pull to help this young man, to offer him a chance at something better than what life had handed him thus far. After a long pause, John finally spoke, his voice calm but purposeful. "Malik," he began, "what you did for Emily, it's something that can't be ignored. You didn't know her. You didn't owe her anything. Yet you chose to help without a second thought, even at a cost to yourself. That's rare. And that's something worth recognizing." Malik, still standing awkwardly in front of them, looked down at the floor, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to receiving praise or recognition. It was always just him, trying to keep his head above water. The weight of their words pressed down on him. But there was something about them, about John's tone, that felt different. It wasn't just the typical kindness people extended when they were trying to make someone feel better, it felt genuine. And in that moment, Malik knew he wasn't just being thanked for a random act of kindness. There was something bigger at play here, something that could change his life forever. "Listen, Malik," John continued, his voice steady. "I've been in your shoes. In some ways, I've worked hard all my life, but I've also been lucky. Lucky to have opportunities. And I know not everyone gets those. But I've seen what you're capable of. You've got something in you, a drive, a heart that could take you far." Malik didn't quite understand what John was implying. He wasn't sure where this conversation was going. But the words were starting to sink in. He had always dreamed of going to college, of becoming a doctor and helping people the way doctors had helped him when he was younger. But college had always felt like a distant dream, one he would never be able to afford. And even if he could, the idea of leaving his family behind seemed impossible. But John wasn't finished. "I'm offering you something, Malik. A full scholarship to any college you choose. All expenses paid, tuition, housing, everything. I've seen the potential in you. And I want to help you make the most of it. You don't have to struggle anymore. You don't have to do this alone." The words were so unexpected that they hit Malik like a bolt of lightning. His heart raced. And for a moment, he couldn't breathe. A full scholarship. The opportunity to go to college. It felt surreal. Like a dream he had pushed to the back of his mind so many years ago that he had stopped believing it was even possible. Malik stared at John, speechless. His mind raced, trying to process what had just been said. This was everything he had ever wanted. But it came with so much uncertainty. Could he really leave everything behind and take this chance? Could he afford to dream that big? To believe that this opportunity was meant for him? "Why me?" Malik finally managed to ask, his voice almost a whisper. John smiled gently, his gaze unwavering. "Because you're the kind of person who would stop to help someone. No questions asked. Because you have the kind of heart and integrity that I admire. And because I believe you deserve a chance to do something great with your life." Malik felt his emotions rising again, threatening to overwhelm him. He had spent so many years fighting for his family, for a life that barely felt within reach. And now, here was an opportunity that could change everything. But could he really accept it? Could he leave his family behind and pursue something that felt so far out of his grasp? John's words hung in the air. A promise. A lifeline. And in that moment, Malik knew that this was his chance not just to change his life, but to give his family something they had never had before: hope. The road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time, Malik felt a flicker of possibility. And maybe, just maybe, that was all he needed to take the first step. The quiet hum of the room seemed to press in around Malik as he processed the weight of John Scott's words. The offer, though seemingly impossible, was now on the table. John and Emily's generosity wasn't just a passing gesture, it was an invitation to a completely different life. One that Malik had never dared to dream of. For years, his ambitions had been stifled by financial constraints and the need to care for his family. But now, the possibility of escaping that struggle, of pursuing something bigger than the daily grind, lay within his grasp. But before he could even begin to think about what accepting this scholarship would mean, a voice broke through the stillness. Karen, Malik's mother, had been standing quietly behind him, her eyes wide in disbelief. She had always known how hard Malik had worked to keep their lives together, how much he had sacrificed for the family. And now, a stranger was offering him something so extraordinary that it almost felt like a dream. "Are you sure about this?" Karen asked, her voice laced with a mix of caution and hope. Her hands, once rough and worn from years of labor, fidgeted at her sides. She was not accustomed to receiving anything freely, especially not from strangers. Her entire life had been spent fighting for every opportunity, every break. She was grateful beyond measure for what the Scotts had done for Malik. But this offer was so overwhelming it made her feel like her feet had been swept out from under her. John nodded earnestly, as if he could feel the gravity of her question. "Absolutely. We've been lucky in our lives. And we want to share that luck with Malik and with your family. This isn't charity, Karen. It's an investment in Malik's future, and in his ability to make a difference in the world. What he did for Emily shows me the kind of man he is. And I believe he has the potential to do something extraordinary with the right opportunities." Emily, standing by her husband, added softly, "It's not just about Malik, Karen. We've seen the sacrifices you've made, too. This offer extends to you and Chris as well. We want to help you get on your feet. You've given so much to others, it's time for someone to give back to you." The room felt heavier now, the weight of their words sinking deeper into Malik's heart. He glanced at his mother, who was visibly fighting back tears. He could see the years of hardship in her face, the sleepless nights, the worries about how to pay the bills, the constant tension of having to be everything for her sons. This offer from the Scotts wasn't just for him, it was a lifeline for the entire family. A chance to break free from the cycle of poverty that had defined their lives for so long. Karen took a deep breath and reached out to gently touch Malik's shoulder. The years of worry seemed to weigh on her. But there was a flicker of something else now. Something like hope. She had always believed in Malik's potential. But never had she dared to imagine that someone outside their family would believe in him too. "I've worked hard all my life," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But this is more than I could have ever asked for. We've struggled. Yes. But I've never lost faith in what Malik can do." And now, her voice trailed off as she wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Now I see what you see in him. I see the chance to finally give my children a future." The weight of her words hit Malik like a flood. A swell of gratitude and love for his mother filling his chest. He had worked so hard to protect her, to make sure she didn't carry the full burden of their struggles alone. But now, for the first time, he could see the possibility of a future where his mother didn't have to bear the weight of their survival on her shoulders anymore. John's eyes softened as he saw the exchange between mother and son. He knew that what they were offering wasn't just a scholarship, it was the chance for this family to reshape their destiny. He believed in Malik. He believed in Karen. And, most importantly, he believed in the power of generosity to change lives, to break down the walls that held people back from reaching their full potential. Malik stood there, trying to process the offer, still unsure of whether he was worthy of such a gift. Could he leave behind everything he had known? Could he take a leap of faith and trust that his future could be different, better, than what he had always imagined? But as he looked at his mother's tear-streaked face, as he saw the love and support in the eyes of the Scotts, something inside him shifted. For the first time in his life, he felt the stirrings of belief not just in himself, but in the power of kindness, in the idea that maybe he could make a difference, that he could finally become the person he had always dreamed of being. Malik took a deep breath and turned to John and Emily. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can fully understand what you're offering right now, but I promise you, I won't waste it. I won't let you down." John smiled warmly, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding of what this moment meant. "We're not just giving you an opportunity, Malik. We're giving you a chance to be part of something bigger, something that can change your life and the lives of your family. Don't ever doubt that you deserve this." And for the first time, Malik felt it deep in his bones. He had a future. A real, tangible future. And it all began with one simple act of kindness. The first few weeks after Malik's acceptance into college were a blur of excitement and doubt. Everything felt surreal. One moment, he was a young man fighting against the odds to make ends meet for his family. And the next, he was standing at the threshold of a new world, one that promised opportunities, challenges, and the kind of future he had only dared to dream about. Malik's first days on campus were filled with nerves and uncertainty. The campus was vast and unfamiliar, filled with students from all walks of life, each with their own dreams and aspirations. Malik couldn't help but feel a pang of insecurity. He wasn't like the other students. They seemed to walk with an air of confidence, their lives already paved with resources and networks. He, on the other hand, had arrived here with nothing but the weight of his dreams and a scholarship funded by the kindness of the Scotts. The workload was intense, and the expectations were high. But Malik was determined. Every night, after his classes, he would retreat to his small dorm room, pore over textbooks, and force himself to push through the exhaustion. His mind was constantly occupied with thoughts of his family. He thought of his mother, Karen, And how hard she worked at Scott Industries. Her new job. Her newfound sense of independence. And the way she was finally able to breathe without the crushing pressure of financial strain, Malik could feel the transformation in her too. She had always been his rock. And now, she was finally getting the opportunity to thrive. Malik's younger brother, Chris, wasn't far behind in his own journey. Inspired by Malik's courage and the support from the Scotts, Chris had thrown himself into his own academic pursuits. Where once he had struggled with self-doubt and frustration, Chris now found himself excelling in his studies. The thought of law school began to take root in his mind. And with his scholarship to college, he too began to feel the weight of possibility on his shoulders. Every time Malik returned home on weekends, he was struck by how much had changed in their lives. The small house they once struggled to keep together was now filled with a quiet sense of stability. Karen no longer wore the same tired expression of someone who had been grinding away just to survive. She was taking evening classes to expand her skills, eager to climb higher in her career. There was a new energy in the house, a renewed sense of hope. But Malik was also learning a lot about himself during this time. He was discovering that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. He had always been a fighter. But this was different. College was more than just textbooks and exams. It was about learning how to navigate a new world, finding his place among people who didn't share his struggles, and realizing that success wasn't just about achieving goals, it was about resilience, about standing up after every setback, and finding purpose even when it felt like the odds were stacked against him. One night, as he sat at his desk in the dorm, staring at his notes and trying to make sense of a particularly difficult biology lecture, Malik thought about the Scotts. He thought about Emily's gratitude, John's belief in him, and how they had given him more than just an education. They had given him something much bigger, something intangible that would forever change the course of his life: hope. They had taken a chance on him, and that chance had planted a seed that was now growing inside him, pushing him to give everything he had toward his future. In the quiet of his room, surrounded by textbooks and scattered papers, Malik realized that he wasn't just in college to earn a degree. He was there to prove something to himself, to show the world that despite his past, despite all the obstacles he had overcome, he could be more than just a product of his circumstances. He could be someone who made a difference, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in him. The weeks turned into months, and Malik's confidence began to grow. He found himself in study groups with students who were eager to help him. His professors, seeing his determination, began to offer him additional support and encouragement. For the first time, Malik wasn't just getting by, he was excelling. In one of his toughest classes, an organic chemistry course that had once seemed insurmountable, Malik found a surprising ally, a fellow student named Lucas. Lucas had been part of a group that initially looked down on Malik, assuming he didn't belong in a college like theirs. But as Malik's dedication became clear, Lucas reached out, offering to study together. They worked late into the night, sharing notes, discussing difficult concepts, and slowly, Malik began to see the material in a different light. What started as a challenging subject soon became one he was mastering. This was a lesson Malik would carry with him for the rest of his life. Success wasn't just about hard work, it was also about the people who crossed your path. The ones who saw you for who you truly were. And the ones who helped you become the best version of yourself. As he sat in the library one afternoon, reflecting on all that had changed since he first stepped foot on campus, Malik smiled to himself. The journey was far from over. But he was no longer the uncertain young man who had been offered a lifeline by the Scotts. He was someone with a purpose he was determined to see through. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he truly belonged. Years passed, and with each passing day, the bond between the Johnson and Scott families grew deeper, more intertwined, more resilient. What started as an unexpected act of kindness on the side of a suburban road had blossomed into something far greater than either family could have ever imagined. It was a bond that transcended race, class, and circumstance. A testament to the extraordinary power of human connection and the ripple effects of one small, selfless act. Malik had graduated from medical school, a dream he had held on to since his childhood, and was now working at a prestigious hospital in the city. The years of sacrifice, the long nights spent studying, the financial struggles that seemed endless, had all culminated in this moment. As he stood in his white coat for the first time, holding his medical degree, he thought back to that fateful day when he had helped Emily Scott on the side of the road. He had never imagined that helping a stranger in need would lead him here. And yet, here he was, a doctor, someone who could make a real difference in people's lives. But Malik knew he wasn't just a doctor because of his own efforts. He was there because of the love, belief, and support of those who had crossed his path along the way. He was there because of Emily and John Scott, who had taken a chance on him when no one else would. Their unwavering faith in his potential had been the catalyst that propelled him forward, even when he doubted himself. And as he looked at his life now, he realized that their kindness had shaped not just his future, but the futures of everyone around him. Chris, too, had found his path. The scholarship he received to attend law school had opened new doors, and he had poured himself into his studies with the same dedication that Malik had shown in his own education. Now, Chris was finishing his final year of law school. With plans to become a public defender, he was determined to use his legal knowledge to fight for social justice, to help people who, like their family, had been overlooked and marginalized by society. Both Malik and Chris had come to understand something profound along their respective journeys. Success was not just about achieving personal goals, it was about lifting others up along the way. They had been given opportunities that many would never experience, and they were determined to use those opportunities to help others. They had witnessed firsthand the impact of kindness, the ripple effect of one good deed, and they both knew that they had an obligation to pay that kindness forward. Back home, Karen had risen through the ranks at Scott Industries. She had become a valued member of the team, her confidence and expertise growing with each passing year. What had once been a job she took just to survive was now a career that brought her fulfillment and pride. She had bought a new house for her family, a small but comfortable place that reflected the hard work and sacrifices they had made over the years. There was no more living paycheck to paycheck, no more wondering how they would make ends meet. Karen was now the one offering advice to others, mentoring young women at Scott Industries, just as she had been mentored by Emily in the early days of her new job. The families gathered every year for Thanksgiving, a tradition that had become a symbol of the profound transformation they had all undergone. The meal, once modest, had grown richer not just in food, but in meaning. They sat around the table, laughing, sharing stories, and reflecting on all they had accomplished. What started as an unexpected and unspoken bond between two families had now become a lasting legacy. At Thanksgiving, Emily and John looked around the table, their hearts full. They had watched Malik and Chris grow into the men they were today, determined, compassionate, and successful. They had witnessed the incredible resilience of Karen, who had rebuilt her life and supported her children with unwavering love. And they had been witness to the extraordinary journey of their own family, which had been touched and forever changed by one young man's simple act of kindness. John, ever the quiet observer, had a way of summing things up with a few words that left a lasting impact. As they all sat around the table one year, he raised his glass, and with a soft smile, he said, "It's amazing how life can change with just one moment of kindness. What started as an accident, a simple choice to stop and help someone, has changed everything for all of us. This is what happens when we believe in each other." The years had brought so much more than they could have ever anticipated. The families were no longer bound by circumstance or chance, they were bound by love, respect, and shared experience. Each of them had changed in profound ways, personally, professionally, and emotionally. For Malik, the journey was far from over. But he had learned the most important lesson of all, that the greatest gift in life was not the success you achieved for yourself, but the difference you made in the lives of others. And for the Johnson and Scott families, their lives had been forever intertwined in ways they could never have imagined. Their futures shaped by the kindness of one individual, the ripple effects of which would be felt for generations to come. As the years had unfolded, the journey each character had taken had woven a tapestry of lessons learned, lessons not just about the world, but about themselves, their potential, and the power of human connection. Now, as they sat together one final time, each person reflected on their journey and the profound truths they had discovered along the way. Malik, now a successful doctor, sat back in his chair, his eyes focused on the faces of the people he loved. The weight of the years had not dulled his sense of gratitude, rather, it had deepened it. He had come to realize that life's greatest purpose was not to chase after personal achievement, but to lift others up. He thought of Emily and John, the pivotal moment they had given him by believing in him when he had little belief in himself, and of Chris, who had watched his every move, following in his footsteps. Malik understood now that true success was about sharing the gifts you received with others. His life, he realized, had been shaped by the kindness of those around him, and now, his mission was to return that kindness, to help others just as he had been helped. We are the sum of the people who believe in us, Malik thought, and we have the power to be the reason someone else believes in themselves. Chris, sitting next to Malik, was on the cusp of his own future. As a young man about to graduate from law school, he reflected on the transformation he had undergone. His life, too, had been altered by the kindness of others. He thought back to the way Malik had helped him navigate the early years of school, how their mother's new job had allowed them to dream bigger. Chris understood that no one could succeed in isolation. It took a community, a network of people who cared enough to invest in your future. Empathy doesn't just heal, it creates change, he mused. He had chosen a path in law to help others find justice. And his mission was clear, to give those who had been forgotten a voice. I'm here because of the people who never gave up on me, he thought. And now, I'm here to help those who feel forgotten, to be their voice. Karen, now a proud mother and professional, had grown into someone entirely different from the woman who once struggled to make ends meet. She had seen how hard work, mixed with a little faith and generosity, could change everything. Her role at Scott Industries had not only provided stability for her family but had also given her a sense of purpose and pride. She had learned that no matter how difficult the circumstances, there was always room for growth and reinvention. Success is not about where you start, but where you choose to go, she thought, her eyes softening as she gazed around the room. It's about what you make of the opportunities you're given and the impact you can have on others. She knew now that success was not simply about achieving your dreams, but about helping others achieve theirs. Life doesn't owe you anything, Karen mused, but what you give to others can change everything. Emily, sitting across from Karen, couldn't help but smile as she thought about how far they had come. When Malik had stopped to help her all those years ago, she had no idea how her life would be transformed. Her own family had grown and thrived, and she had seen the incredible ripple effects of one single moment of kindness. But for Emily, the most significant lesson was one of grace and humility. She realized that no matter how strong or independent she had become, sometimes, life required accepting help from others. We don't always have to be strong on our own, she thought. Sometimes, allowing others to help us is the greatest strength we can show. She had learned that there was no shame in needing others, and in fact, it was through these connections that true healing and growth occurred. The best way to pay back kindness, Emily thought, is to give it forward, just as Malik did for me. John, the patriarch of the Scott family, had watched the transformation of not just his own family, but also of the Johnsons. He had seen the incredible impact of belief in someone's potential, even when they couldn't see it themselves. For John, The most profound lesson was that kindness didn't just change a moment, it could change a lifetime. Never underestimate the power of one moment. John thought. The kindness you give today can change someone's tomorrow in ways you'll never fully understand. His life had been marked by the love and loyalty of those around him. And he had learned that investing in people, in their dreams and futures, was the most meaningful work of all. In the end, what we give is what we leave behind, he reflected. It's the lives we touch and the hearts we help heal that matter the most. As the evening wore on, the Johnsons and the Scotts shared one final, quiet moment together. They had come a long way since the day their paths first crossed. And each had learned something invaluable along the way. They had learned that kindness was not just an act, it was a choice. A choice that could change lives, shape futures, and create a legacy far beyond what they could have imagined. In the end, they had learned that the power of love, empathy, and selflessness could heal wounds, transform lives, and bridge divides in ways nothing else could. And as they sat together, they knew one thing for sure: the greatest lesson of all was that the smallest act of kindness could, indeed, change the world.